Hello and welcome back to Something Z, and welcome to if Deku had an anti-Quirk Quirk Part 3. Last time on the What If, Class 1A survived the USJ attack, and the last part ended on a cliffhanger since All Might just asked Izuku if he wanted to inherit his quirk. So now let's jump back into the What If. So we begin this What If where it left off, so only a second has passed since All Might asked the question. At first Izuku was confused and he started to mutter to himself, but after a couple of minutes he got stopped by All Might, who then tells him about One For All and how he can give him his quirk. Izuku then asks All Might to give him a day for him to make his decision, which All Might allows. So we skip to the next day, and Izuku that whole day couldn't think of anything else besides the offer All Might gave him, since it could give him so much power. But what if there was someone more worthy than him? What if he's too weak to handle it? But during lunch, Izuku thought about what happened during the USJ, and how even with his quirk he couldn't do anything, and how he was almost killed. So Izuku after school gets called by All Might to meet him in the teacher's lounge. And when Izuku got, All Might was sitting on one of two couches. And when Izuku closed the door, he sat down across from him. All Might then asked if Izuku would accept his deal or not. And this time, the answer Izuku gives is yes. So when All Might hears this, he plucks a strand of his hair. He then says, "Eat this." At first Izuku was confused, but when All Might saw Izuku's face, he explained, "For you to inherit my power, you need to eat some of my DNA." So Izuku then grabbed the hair, and after a couple of minutes he was able to consume it. All Might then says that it will fully transfer in a couple of hours, but since he may lose control, he should use his anti-quirk and cover his body, just in case if One For All tries to activate. So now we skip a couple of hours, and Izuku was doing exactly what All Might said to do. So he had his quirk cover his whole body, but when he was in his room, he was doing some exercise. But while he was doing his push-ups, he got very tired and he tried to do one more push-up before he was done. But while he wasn't paying attention, power surged into his arms, and he tried to put all of his strength into one last push. But when he pushed off the ground, he somehow launched himself to the ceiling of his room. And when he hit the ceiling, he created a loud thud. And when he landed on the ground, he made another thud. And when his mom heard this, she rushed into his room, and she asked what was that. Izuku then covered the scratches he just got, and he lied, and said that he didn't know what she was talking about. And hearing this, she leaves. So now we skip to the next day, and when class started, Aizawa announced that the sports festival will happen in a couple of weeks. And when the class heard this, they questioned if they should even have a sports festival, since they just got attacked. But Aizawa then said that if they didn't hold the festival, it would show the villains that the attack scared us, so we must do the festival. And hearing this, the class shuts up. So now we skip to the end of the day, and Izuku calls All Might, asking how he was able to use his quirk, even though he was covered in his anti-quirk. And All Might says that since One For All is a stockpile quirk, it must be too strong for his quirk to completely overpower it. So it's then that the two start Izuku's training. And during those 2 weeks, Izuku learned that he can use One For All up to 5% without feeling any pain, since Izuku is used to transferring power from one part of his body to another. And he learned that his anti-quirk could be used as a limiter, to make sure he didn't accidentally lose control. But when he uses both at the same part of his body, he loses more energy than normal. And when he does that, he has to use more One For All to equal back to 5%. And the day before the festival, the same things happened with Shinso and Tetsu. And All Might told Izuku to try his best in the festival, to show everyone who the next symbol of peace will be. So now we skip to the day of the sports festival. And the thing with Todoroki doesn't happen since no one else knows about Izuku having One For All. So when the event started, Class 1A walked into the stadium with the main instructor being Midnight. And when she was done explaining the first event, everyone lined up. And when everyone was prepared, Midnight began to count down. And when the count ended, the obstacle race began. So everyone tried to run through a thin hallway, but after a couple of minutes, Todoroki froze the ground, sticking most of the racers in place, with Izuku being trapped as well. But Izuku activated One For All in his feet, and he jumped as high as he could. Then he ran through the group of people, and Izuku kept One For All in his feet to make him run faster while keeping his quirk negative focused in his head, making sure the two energies don't clash. And eventually he was able to make it to the group of runners that didn't get stuck. But when he got there, the teachers released multiple robots from the exams. He was going to help some people take down some of the robots, but before he can help, he saw his zero-pointer get covered in ice, and it began to fall. But before it fell, he saw Todoroki run under it, so Izuku kept running. And when he got to the fallen zero-pointer, he jumped over it after a couple of minutes. So now he is 20 feet from Todoroki. But when he looked at Todoroki, he saw Bakugo fly at him. So Izuku knew he had to keep running, and eventually he made it to the canyon, which slowed him down because he had to climb it. But when he made it through, he was around a mile behind the two. So he pushed One For All to its safe limit, which was 7%. And at that percent, he was still able to move without too much pain, but he shouldn't be in that state for more than 30 minutes. And when he got to the landmine, they were now 10 feet away, and Bakugo was currently attacking Todoroki. Izuku spent a bit of time trying to find the best way to get to them. But while he was thinking, a couple of runners began to walk across. It's then where he sees how powerful the mines were. So Izuku then came up with a plan. So he began to activate One For All into his legs. and he ran back a couple of feet, and when he was ready he ran and jumped over the mines as far as he could. And when he landed on a mine he quickly jumped as fast as he could, and he used the explosion from the mine to launch him farther. And after multiple explosions he was able to get to them. But in exchange of getting to them, he took damage from the explosions. But he was too full of adrenaline to actually feel it, and it wasn't enough to bring him out of the festival. So when he made it to the two of them, he jumped over them. And since there were multiple explosions, and not one giant one, the two didn't actually notice him. And seeing him, Bakugo flew at Izuku trying to catch up to him, and Todoroki trying to catch up to the two, created an ice path over the mines. And eventually the three were able to make it past the mines. So now they had to make it to the school in a straight line. But while Bakugo and Todoroki were distracted on running, Izuku plucked 2 strands of his hair from his head and he placed them into their shirts. And when the strands made contact with them, it made them lose their quirks, which made Bakugo go slower, but Todoroki was able to go at the same pace. And eventually the three got to the stadium with Izuku getting first place, Todoroki getting second, and Bakugo getting third. So now we skip to when everyone makes it back, and when they do, they are told what the next phase is, which was the cavalry battle. And when she was finished explaining the rules, she shows the points that everyone has, and it's revealed that Izuku has 10 million points. Then they were given 15 minutes to find a team for the cavalry battle. And Izuku, with him having the highest headband, was having a hard time finding people to team with. And everything happens the same, so all of the teams will be the exact same. So now we skip to when the cavalry battle begins, and at the start many teams go after Izuku, but Izuku covered his whole body, except his lower half, with his anti-quirk, so whenever a team got close, he could touch them, and they would lose their quirks for a short period of time. And after around 20 minutes, Izuku's team was able to get 100 points. But after 20 minutes, some blonde-haired guy touched Izuku's arm, and he tried to flick his fingers to launch a blast of air. But to his surprise, nothing happened. He then tried to go for another swipe, but now that Izuku knows what's going on, he grabbed onto the guy's wrist. And when Monoma was able to wiggle out of Izuku's grip, he touched his teammate's hair and he started to blow air at Izuku. But nothing happened. Izuku and his team then tried to go for that team's headband, but before they could, they got interrupted by Bakugo and Todoroki's teams, who then rushed Izuku trying to get the 10 million point headband. And after a couple of minutes, Monoma's quirk returns to him and he starts to go after Bakugo's team. So now it's just Izuku and Todoroki's team fighting for the headband. But Ito was able to use his reciprocal burst, and with his new speed, he was able to grab the 10 million point headband. Then Izuku's team fights to get it back, and at the last second, Izuku tries to use One for All to cut through the air, but Todoroki on instinct uses his fire quirk to make Izuku back away, which worked. And before anything else could happen, time ran out, and Izuku's team barely had enough to go to the next phase. And when the cavalry battle ended, they were given time for lunch. And during lunch, Izuku and Todoroki talked, and Todoroki asked if Izuku is All Might's secret love child. But after some talking, Todoroki walks off, not believing anything Izuku said. So now we skip to when lunch is over, and when everyone gets to the stage, they are told the matchups for the 1v1s. And the same things happen with Ojiro and someone from Class 1B, so they both forfeit. And when that's all over, they are told to go to the bleachers, except for Shinzo and Izuku, since their match is first. And before the match began, Ojiro told Izuku about Shinzo's quirk, and how to activate it, but when he's done explaining, he leaves. So now we skip when the match was about to start, and Izuku covered his whole body in his anti-quirk, and he currently had One for All deactivated. And when the match began, Shinzo started to talk to Izuku, but Izuku kept his mouth shut. But when Shinzo started to talk about Ojiro, Izuku told Shinzo to shut up, and that's when Shinzo tried to use his quirk on him. But to his surprise, nothing happened, and Izuku was just standing in place angry. Shinzo then bombards Izuku with questions, and Izuku answers all of them. But no matter how much Shinzo tried, Izuku wasn't infected by his quirk. And after a couple of minutes, Izuku put One for All into his legs, and he rushed at Shinzo, and he flung Shinzo out of the arena, thus making Izuku the winner of the match. So now we skip to right before the match between Izuku and Todoroki. And when Izuku is walking to the prep room, he gets stopped by Endeavor, who tells Izuku to try his best since he could be good practice for Todoroki against All Might, since he's so similar. But Izuku then continues to walk to his room, and he says before he leaves that he is nothing like All Might, and Todoroki isn't anything like him. So now we skip to when the match actually starts. And Todoroki begins the fight by launching an ice attack at Izuku, but Izuku put One for All into his legs, and he was barely able to jump over it. Then Izuku puts it into his fingers, and he starts to flick his fingers at Todoroki, launching air at him. But in response, Todoroki put ice right behind him, and he shot another wave of ice at Izuku. But since Izuku doesn't get injured from flicking his fingers, they keep on repeating this cycle, until eventually Izuku notices that with every ice attack, Todoroki becomes slower and slower, from the cold. He then asks, "Why are you trembling, Todoroki? Why aren't you actually trying?" Todoroki then says that it's none of his business and to just continue the fight, but Izuku shouts saying that it is his business since he hasn't tried this whole time, but he still wants to win even though everyone else here has tried their hardest to show everyone what they got. He then shouts, "You're scared of becoming him, aren't you?" Then Todoroki shouts to shut up, but Izuku continues, and eventually shouts it's your power, not his. Then Todoroki starts to reflect about everything, and after a couple of seconds, Todoroki's side starts to get engulfed in flames, and they decide to go for one final clash. So Todoroki starts to use his fire and ice, while Izuku focuses anti-quirk in his chest. Then he puts as much power into his arms and legs as possible, so now it's actually 100%. Then Todoroki launches a giant block at Izuku, which he was able to jump over. Then he launches a huge wave of flames, and Izuku uses his right arm to punch as hard as he could. But while these two were distracted, Cementos and Midnight could tell their attacks could kill each other. So Cementos put a giant wall of cement between the two. And when the attacks collide, it creates a huge explosion. And when the dust settles, they see Izuku, but he's outside of the arena. And for the first time, Izuku is broken because of One For All. So saying that Izuku was out, Todoroki was labeled as the winner since he was still in. And when the match was over, Izuku was taken to Recover Girl to be healed. And since Izuku didn't go crazy in the match, he isn't permanently injured. But since he was tired from using both of his quirks, he couldn't completely be healed. And to heal him, Recover Girl had to put anti-quirk cuffs on him. Since I forgot to mention this in the previous parts, but Izuku's quirk can't be simply turned on and off, but rather it's always inside of him. He has learned over time to condense it energy and move it, but it's still there, unless you put a quirk dampener on him. So when Izuku woke up and got healed, he went back to watch the rest of the festival, with the outcome staying the same. So Bakugo gets first place, Todoroki gets second, and Tokoyami gets third. So now we skip 2 days, since the school wanted to give the students time to rest after the festival. And during that time, Izuku got fully healed. And when the school day began, Aizawa showed everyone the pros that picked them for the internships. And the amount are the same, with Bakugo and Todoroki getting the most. But this time Izuku is the third highest with the picks, since he showed how useful his anti-quirk is and how powerful his super strength is. And after he's done showing them, Midnight walks into the room, and they are given whiteboards to write their new code names. And the name Izuku chose was the negative hero, Negate. Then they spend the rest of the day trying to find agencies to intern for. But before Izuku could pick one, All Might ran into the room and he told Izuku to follow him. And eventually he led Izuku to a hallway far away. Then he gives Izuku a piece of paper while he was visibly shaking. Izuku then reads the paper and it says Gran Torino. He then asks what the paper is about, and All Might responds by saying he was his old instructor, and since he saw him break his body during the festival, he wants to train Izuku as well. And hearing this, Izuku accepts the offer. So now we skip a couple of days and it's time for the internships to begin. But before they leave, Izuku and Ochako walk to Ida, and they say that they're his friends, and that he could tell them anything. Ida then looks at them and nods, then he continues to walk to his train. And a couple of hours later, Izuku made it to what looked like a rundown apartment, and when he opened the door he saw a small old man on the floor with red stuff under him. At first Izuku thought he was dead, but after a couple of seconds the old man raises his head, and the red stuff revealed itself to be ketchup he spilled. He then asked for Izuku's name, and Izuku replied by saying Izuku Midoriya, but the old man said, "Oh hello Toshi." Confused, Izuku said that he's going to make a phone call, and he was going to call All Might to ask if his teacher's gone mad, but before he could call him, he saw Gran Torino look through his things. Then the old man told Izuku to launch a smash at him. At first Izuku refused since he didn't want to hurt Gran Torino, but the old man started to get serious and he used his quirk to launch himself on the top of the door frame. Then he tells him to use One For All. Then he starts to jump out the room at high speeds, and while he was jumping around, he said that Izuku had good control over One For All, but with his other quirk neither of them are effective, and when he tries to use one to the fullest he fails. Izuku, after a couple of hits from Gran Torino, tries to use each of his quirks in each hand, but Gran Torino was too fast for him, and he didn't even have enough time to switch body parts before he got hit again. Izuku then tried to read Gran Torino's movements, but he wasn't able to react in time when Gran Torino hit him on the side, launching him into a wall. And with him on the ground, Gran Torino said that the training was done for the day, and he said that Izuku is not thinking of One For All as his own quirk, and that he's too scared to use it. Then Gran Torino goes to the grocery store, and while Gran Torino was gone, Izuku thought about what he was just told. And that night, Izuku did some training while Gran Torino was asleep, to see if he can switch One For All to different parts of his body without even thinking about it. But he still had problems switching, and by the end of the night's training, he was covered in scratches and bruises. So he skipped to the next morning, and Izuku was told to heat up Gran Torino's food, but he failed to heat them up correctly on all sides. And he gets shouted by Gran Torino, but while he was being yelled at, he started to connect the dots, and he started to cover himself with One For All, since before he'd just been switching body parts. But then he realized what if he didn't have to switch, and he just kept the power on. So he spread One For All through his whole body, and he split negative into his hands, making it so he has his own version of full cowling, with the percentage being 6%. And seeing that Izuku learned what he was talking about, Gran Torino tells Izuku it's time to train again. Then Gran Torino started to jump around the room, and he said he had 3 minutes to catch him. And Izuku used his speed to jump around the room, but Gran Torino was still more skilled at jumping around, so he was able to knock Izuku to the ground. But Izuku was able to jump back up, and he swiped his hand, which launched a wave of air at Gran Torino, which he almost completely dodged, but Gran Torino got a cut on his cheek from the wind. Then time ran out, so now he skipped to later that night, and Gran Torino decided to take Izuku to Tokyo to get some actual training against someone besides him. But while they were on the train to Tokyo, they made it to Hosu, and before they could leave, someone on the train points out that a building exploded, and before the two could see what was happening, a Nomu bursts through the train holding a pro hero. Torino then tells Izuku to stay on the train, then he leaps at the Nomu, and then he pushes it out of the train. But when Izuku sees that the city is on fire, he jumps out of the train to see how he could help. And eventually he was able to make it where the biggest fire was. And while he was looking around, he saw multiple pro heroes fighting a group of Nomus. But eventually he heard the pro hero manual shout for Ida. And when he heard this, he started to think about where Ida is. Then he remembered that Ida's brother was attacked at Hosu by the hero killer, so he must have gone after him. Then Izuku thinks about where the hero killer is. Then he thinks that he's probably somewhere far from the action. So he activates full cowling and he starts to run through alleyways. And after a couple of minutes, he finds the hero killer standing above Ida, about to stab him. But before the blade hit him, Izuku pulled out his bat and he covered it in his energy. Then he hit Stain in the stomach, launching him a couple of feet away, but he was still standing. And when Izuku's energy hit Stain, it made Stain's quirk deactivate, making it so Native and Ida can move again. And while Ida and Native got up, Izuku got out his phone from his pocket, and he sends an emergency alert to all of Class 1A, giving them his location. He then asks how does Stain's quirk work to the two, and the two reply by saying that he has to ingest your blood, and if he does, you become paralyzed. Ida then thanks Izuku, then he tells him to leave since this is his problem, not his. But Izuku shakes his head, and he tells him he's going to help. Then he rushes at Stain with full cowling activated. But Stain was able to keep up with him, and he slashed Izuku's bat, and that slash cut it in half, making it worthless. So Izuku threw the bat away, and the four began to fight, with Stain able to keep up with them, since 2 of the 3 people were injured. But after some time, a wave of flames appears, and it almost hits them, and when they look to see where the fire came from, they see Todoroki. Then they continue to fight, and eventually they were able to beat Stain, and they were able to wrap him in rope they found in the alley. Then they waited outside the alley, and after a couple of minutes, a couple of pro heroes appear, with one of them being Gran Torino, and they call for an ambulance to take the 4 away. But before the ambulance arrives, a Nomu with wings appear, and it was able to grab Izuku with his arms pinned at his side so he couldn't escape. And before anyone could do anything, Stain breaks free from the ropes with a knife he had up his sleeve, and he jumped at the Nomu, and he stabbed it in the head, killing it. And when the two land, he starts to talk about false heroes, and how the only person that is allowed to kill him is All Might. And while he was speaking, he paralyzed everyone with his pure bloodlust. But after a couple of minutes, the hero killer gets knocked unconscious, since one of his broken ribs pierced his lungs. And shortly after, the 4 were taken to the hospital. And that's where I'm going to leave the what if. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, put them in the comments below. And I hope to see you next time on Something Z.